So, you want to make your digital footage more cinematic with the genuine Hollywood film look, but you don't want to invest a ton of time and money in buying film cinema cameras and lenses and then learning how to use them and how to develop film. Now, sure, we could make some color grade adjustments, add some grain, but we're all fighting that universal hurdle to get all our creative projects out. Time. The hands of the clock mercilessly swipe by, never giving back what they take. Time filming, time editing, time learning, time rendering. Digital video from today's mirrorless cameras have amazing quality, but tends to have a clinical, clean look that we've grown accustomed to. However, it lacks the nostalgia, the character, the feel of video shot on film that we see in the movies. Now, is there a way that we could make our digital videos look more cinematic? As if they were shot on film? Interested? Could it magically make up for your poor lighting? Well, no. But with over 682,000 installations as of this recording, Dehancer is fast becoming one of the most popular and powerful tools for film emulation on the market. Full disclosure, Dehancer reached out to me to create this review. However, no money exchanged hands, and they put absolutely no restraints on what I say. For example, most of y'all don't need to be buying more stuff. Crocs, they look ridiculous on adults. And pineapple belongs on pizza. And the Marvels, they flopped because it wasn't a good story. And don't get me started on the Avatar movies, which are overrated. Poopsicles. See, I can say what I want. So you're gonna get an honest review of the pros and cons of this plugin and whether it's the right choice for you to get that film look. To get straight to the point, here's the TLDR. Not everyone needs this plugin. On the pro side, its film grain emulation is top of the line, and I like the halation and the bloom effects, as well as how it emulates some of the popular Hollywood film stocks. However, let's be honest. Until about 5 minutes ago, a lot of y'all didn't even know what halation was and couldn't list 5 film stocks by memory. So, unless you're doing projects that require old school film looks, you probably don't need to spend money on this, though you might want to. If you do choose to purchase Dehancer, you can use my special promo code CURIOUS, which will get you 10% discount on your purchase. Let's talk about using Dehancer for the film look. I've used Dehancer on both DaVinci Resolve and on Adobe Premiere, and fundamentally it's the same on both platforms, and I'd assume the same is true for Final Cut Pro. The only real difference between the two programs would be how they manage color space, which is a whole other topic. There are my color management settings for DaVinci Resolve if you're interested. Now, this is not going to be a thorough review of all the settings in Dehancer. We'll just do a quick overview of some of the effects. So after you've installed Dehancer, it should show up here in your effects down at the bottom. I'm just going to add it to this node here, and you can see that it comes on by default with some effects already. Now, just a quick tip, in Resolve, since all of Dehancer's tabs default to being open, you can alt-click or option-click on one of them, and then it'll close all of them and collapse them so that you have a clean window to start from when you're starting to grade with it. Now, one complaint that I do have with Dehancer is the default effects that it has turned on when you apply it to a layer or a node. I wish that it would just give me a blank slate to start from. I always have to go through and disable them before I get started with doing my own grade, and I wish there was an easy way to disable all the effects in Dehancer so that I don't have to search through all of the menus just to do that. But you can also make a preset that just has everything turned off to start with, so it's not a huge deal. Anyways, let me go through and just disable all of the effects that are turned on by default with Dehancer. Okay, great, that gets me a nice blank slate. For me, the first thing that I do is to turn on clipping indication in the monitor tab. This is a useful feature that helps me see instantly if my blacks or whites are clipping. You could also make use of the false color in the monitor tab like this. It's nice to have it built in. Here I'm working with log footage. This is S-Log shot on a Sony ZV-E1. And one cool feature of Dehancer is that if you're working with log footage, you can actually do your color transform on a separate layer or node, but it's also built into Dehancer. So technically you could do all of your grading within Dehancer. You can see that once you've got your camera profile chosen here, that it gives you a really nice base grade to start from. Next, we're gonna choose our film stock. I'm gonna go with the Kodak Vision 50D. And let's just push pull this a little bit. to warm it up. I do wish, however, that there was a better way to cycle through the options in the drop-down menu than having to just reopen it every time and scroll through and click. I know that in Premiere you can use your mouse scroll wheel to scroll through the options when you hover over it, but that doesn't work in DaVinci Resolve, and I'd prefer actually to be able to select it and then use the up-down keys on my keyboard to scroll through the different film stock profiles. And then let's use our developer to adjust this grade a little bit. That's looking pretty good for a nice base to start with. And remember, I've done this without any color correction nodes, this is just straight out of Dehancer. I really like how everything is ordered in Dehancer. Usually I just go through the tabs from top to bottom in my process, then go back and tweak things as needed. But the whole flow makes a lot of sense. The print time allows you to emulate printing the film onto a projector roll as you would for a movie theater. This adds another level of emulation to replicate that cinema sort of experience. Now I'll turn on the analog range limiter. The color head tab allows you to fine tune your hues as well as to warm up or cool down your shadows and mids and highlights. The film grain is where this plugin really shines. There are some great presets for 8, 16, 35, and 65mm film grain. However, you can get really granular and customize it yourself. The film resolution setting does what it sounds like it does. It takes away that really high detailed digital look and makes it look a little bit more like film, which doesn't quite have the same resolution as our 4K and 8K cameras today. One thing to note is that setting the film type to positive instead of negative is going to give you a more true to film grain look, where the grain is not just an overlay but interacts with the underlying image through some of Dehancer's voodoo magic. This is with it in negative. As you can see, that just kind of looks like an overlay on there, and then once you set it to positive, voila, you've got film grain that looks amazing. Now, one thing to note that when you're adding grain with Dehancer in DaVinci Resolve, it's helpful for you to have a noise node here that you can remove the camera noise, the digital noise from your camera when you bump up ISO, for example. And then usually I'll follow that by my color corrections and then my Dehancer node, which has my grain on it. Otherwise, your grain is going to be interfering or interacting with the noise from your camera, which is not going to look great. But once you've got these three nodes set up, you're good to go. Halation gives you that red glow around the backlit and bright objects in your scene. And then bloom does what it sounds like. It makes your highlights bloom. Film damage has some good controls now. You can control the type of damage and how much you want it to jitter throughout the clip, meaning that it won't be the same amount of damage throughout the whole clip, which is more true to life. Film breath gives you the breathing effect of film, and you can adjust to how much or little you want of it. The gate weave adds a subtle jumpiness that you see as a film reel is spun and played back. Overscan. I can't see myself using this other than for specific situations where I'm trying to make a clip look like an old film clip that I've scanned, but I guess it's neat to have. The vignette is a vignette, nothing really groundbreaking here. Now, I like that under output you can adjust the overall impact of the plugin, so you can blend it back in with your original to make the effect even more subtle. You can also generate a LUT here and export it, and you can adjust your preview quality down here depending on your machine and its performance. So here are two looks that I achieved with Dehancer. Let's take a look at a few examples of using Dehancer to achieve different looks for different types of footage. These first two are from client works that I've used Dehancer on. Here we've got a interview shot that's lit and filmed in S-Log3. And let's take a little look at my node tree. And the first node is my color checker node, which is basically just making sure that my colors match to the color checker that I use when filming. And that's just to make sure that all my colors are accurate for this grade. Next is going to be my color balance and primary hues and just the initial sort of grade for this shot. Then I usually have a split node here in my tree, where firstly I'm preserving the skin, and here is basically masking out the skin so that I can make sure that that skin tone is really nicely preserved, because I'm going to do on top of that a teal and orange look with this grade. You can see how I'm bringing in some of the teal in the orange colors, teal in the shadows and low mids, and then the orange colors within the highlights and high mids, right? Then I've got a little bit of a correction node that's just going to correct for any sort of weird color shifts that I see. And then the last node that I usually put is my Dehancer nodes, where I'm just gonna add a subtle film effect over this. This shot is not one that I wanted a heavy film effect on, so it's a lot more subtle than you could go with Dehancer with all of the green and all that stuff. Still has that nice clean look that the client wanted. So usually for my type of work, this is the sort of thing that I'm using Dehancer for. Not really for a heavy film look, but more for something subtle to the shot so it doesn't look quite so sterile and digital. Alright, so this next one is for another client. This is using Dehancer again, with first initial grade, color correction, and then the Dehancer film over it. This next grade is a shot from downtown Toronto. I'm using the Kodak Vision 200T, printed on Kodak Endura. And let's zoom in and you can see the halation and bloom effects really well here in this shot with this backlit window.
Alright, so I don't know how the audio is going to be on this, but Canada was way too cold to go outside and shoot, and kind of great. So here we are in Trinidad on the beach, and hoping to capture some sunny shots that I can do some color grades with and see how it looks with Dehancer.
Alright, and here I'm grading one of the shots from the beach, and just like that you can go from something like this to this. Here are a few more of the beach shots just to show a couple of more film styles that you can achieve. These are all shot in S-Log3 and graded only with Dehancer. So you can see it's pretty powerful what you can do just with Dehancer. You can even get the really old school 8mm film look, or something like the 16mm film look with the Fujifilm colors to it. Or you can go for something a little bit more subtle like this grade. And for this last one, the halation, I did it with no remjet, and the overscan is set to 65mm Ultra Panavision. These last few grades are going to be of some stock video, just for you to get a feel of what types of film looks you can achieve with a variety of different lighting situations. I'm using a M2 Max with 32GB of memory and haven't noticed any significant slowdown using Dehancer 7.1 on either Premiere or DaVinci Resolve. However, I have heard some people experiencing slower performance with the plugin. Now, Resolve does run faster with Dehancer than Premiere, but that might just be because Resolve is far better optimized than Premiere overall, at least in my experience. One of the things that stood out to me as I created these different looks was how quickly you could iterate and make them. If this is something that you do often, the time savings from a tool like Dehancer might actually be worth considering. I've looked at a few different film plugins over the years, such as Film Convert, Koji, and Filmbox. However, I've never actually pulled the trigger on any of them. Honestly, I've never really saw the value that it would add to my production for the price. If I need that film look, I can make do with, stock features in DaVinci Resolve or Premiere Pro. Don't buy stuff you don't need. If you're still learning how to use your camera settings, set up good lighting, think about framing, composition, and timing, then buying a film plugin isn't gonna make your work suddenly look amazing or fix your inconsistencies. Like my facial hair from shot to shot, for example. You catch it? A plugin can't fix fundamentally flawed footage. However, I will say this. Now that I have Dehancer, it has opened up a lot more possibilities for me as a creative and a content creator. Whereas before, I might not have considered adding film grain or emulating a film stock because of the time that it would take to do that, now I can quickly try those things in my projects and expand the range of creative possibilities that I can offer to my clients. And perhaps for some, this might be the real value of a plugin like this, and maybe it's worth the investment. Sometimes the extra boost of creative energy that you get from a new tool is worth it when you have those creative low points. Last thing as we wrap up here, let's look at a price comparison. Now, in terms of price, Dehancer isn't the most expensive, nor is it the cheapest option. Filmbox is about $999 for the lifetime license. Film Convert and Koji are $129 and $199 respectively. Dehancer kind of sits right in the middle of all of those. The lifetime version is $449, however, this is where Dehancer stands out, since they have multiple different tiers to suit your budget and your needs. You can get the light version for $199, which gives you 63 different film profiles, film grain, bloom, defringed, vignette, and some other features which, to be honest, might be good enough for a lot of people's needs. It doesn't include features like the film developer and film damage and compression or gate weave and halation, but you may not need those, and you can also purchase those as single packs for bloom, grain, breath, and halation separately to add on later. They also have lifetime or subscription options for each pack, and this makes this suite of plugins from Dehancer one of the most flexible for budget-minded buyers. For me, if I were not using this in a paid production, I probably wouldn't buy it. However, considering the average cost of most video jobs, you should be able to cover the cost of this plugin within a few shoots, depending on your profit margins. So even though I may not have bought it on my own, having it opens up possibilities that I didn't have before, which is something for you to consider. I didn't know what I didn't have. Ultimately, this plugin isn't gonna magically make poor footage look amazing or cinematic, nor is it gonna fix your lighting or prop inconsistencies. Do you catch some of mine in this video? But for some people, it could save them a lot of time or open up new possibilities. For others, it'll be a poor use of money. In my opinion, Dehancer seems to be one of the best options on the market for achieving the film look in digital video. It has a good support team, great documentation, tutorials available, and is available for all the major editing platforms. If you do decide to purchase it, remember to use my code CURIOS at checkout for 10% discount. And until next time, go create something awesome.